Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to make this beautiful crop top with ruffles. If this is something you'd like to know more about, keep on watching and let's get started. I'll start by drafting out my pattern. So I have my lines here already. I have the shoulder line, the chest line, bust points, under bust and the waist lines. I placed half of my shoulder measurements on the shoulder line and on the chest line. Then I also curved out my armhole. What I'm going to do next is to place my bust part measurements, that is half of my nipple to nipple measurements, on the bust point line and on the waist line. Then I connected that with my straight ruler. On the under bust, I placed 1.25 on both sides of the bust part line, while on the waistline I placed 1 inch on both sides of the line. Then I connected that with my straight ruler. I came down by 1 inch from the bust point. This will enable me to draw out my curve properly. So I'm going to connect that with a curve to meet the under bust, just like that. Then I also came up by 1 inch from the bust point. Then I got the midpoint of what I have on my shoulder slope. Then I connected that to meet the bust point line. The next thing I'm going to do now is determine how low I want my neckline to be. You can decide to maintain the chest line or you can go below the chest line depending on how much cleavage you wish to show. I came down by 1 inch for mine. Then on the line that divides the shoulder, I came up by 1 inch. Then I'm going to connect the 2 points together with my curve. And I'll also connect that point into my armhole, just like that. To avoid the neckline from gaping, I'm going to take my dart on the neckline. So what I did was to mark 1 inch on both sides of the line. You can do 0.75 inch on both sides for yours depending on your bust size. Then I connected the points into my bust line, like so. I'll do that to the other side also. Then the next thing I did was to place quarter of my bust circumference on the chest line. And I added 1 inch for my side seam allowance. And on the waistline, I placed quarter of the waist circumference. And I added the 2 inches dart intake before adding my 1 inch side seam allowance. Then I connected the points together. So the next step is to take out the bust dart. The bust dart is simply the difference between the front waist length and the back waist length. Mine is 2 inches. So I came down by 2 inches from the bust points at the side seam. Then I connected that point to meet my bust point, like so. So that is it for my bust dart. So that is all for the front pattern. I'm going to cut this out now. I'm going to cut out the dart. And I'll cut the side also. I'll slash my bust dart. And I'm going to close that up with my masking tape. So that is all for the front pattern. I have the center front and the side front. Then I'm going to move on to the back pattern. So I have my lines here already. I have the shoulder line, the chest line and the waistline. The back waistline is 2 inches shorter than the front waistline. This is my center back. All my measurements will be starting from that point. I placed half of my nipple to nipple measurements on the chest line and on the waistline, and I connected that with my straight ruler. On the waistline, I came in by 1 inch from the center back. This is to avoid your zipper from bulging. So I connected that point to meet the chest line. For my darts, I marked ½ inch on both sides of the bust pan line, and I connected that to meet the chest line. I placed quarter of my bust circumference on the chest line and I added 1 inch side seam allowance. And on the waistline, this right here is my new waistline. I placed quarter of the waist circumference and I added 1 inch for that before adding my 1 inch side seam allowance. Then I connected the points together with my straight ruler. Then I placed 1 inch at the center back for my zipper allowance and I connected the points together. Then the next thing is to determine how low you want your back to be. For mine, I came down by 1 inch from the chest line. Then I connected that to the side seam like so. Then I'll go ahead to tighten my back neckline. So what I'll do there is to mark 1/4 inch on both sides of the line. Then I'll connect that into the dart line. And that will be all for the back pattern. So I'm going to cut this out. So this is my center back and the side back. You can choose to cut your fabric like this, then you just sew your dart on the main fabric. But for mine, I'm going to be closing my darts on the pattern. So I'm just going to fold this over like this and I'm going to close the darts. So I'm going to close my darts with my masking tape. So with this, I don't have to sew my darts on the fabric again. I already closed it on my pattern. As you can see, the side front and the side back are now aligning. I'll go ahead and transfer my pattern to the fabric now. So I've transferred my patterns to the fabric, as you can see, and I cut my lining pieces too exactly the same way. The center front was cut on fold and I added 1/2 inch allowance round the pattern. And for the side front, I added 1/2 inch allowance round the pattern aside the side seam because I already have the side seam allowance on the pattern. And for the back piece, I added 1/2 inch allowance to the top and to the bottom. I already have my zipper allowance and the side seam allowance on my pattern paper. I'll go ahead and remove my pattern paper from the fabric and I'll join the center front and side fronts together. I'm going to place the side fronts on the center front, right side facing each other, and I'll stitch with 1/2 inch. I'll repeat the same process to the other side also. So this is what I have after stitching. The next step is to stitch my back piece to the front piece. So I'm going to place them right side facing each other. I'm going to place the back piece right side facing right side of the front piece. And I'm going to stitch them at the sides with 1 inch allowance. So this is what I have after stitching, and I went ahead to iron my seam flat. As you can see, I already stitched my lining piece also. Everything I did to the main fabric, I've done to the lining piece also. So I'm going to set this aside and I'll work on the ruffles. So I'm using organza fabric for my ruffles and I've gone ahead to cut out the pieces. So for the amount of organza you'll be needing, you can just get like 2 yards of organza. You might not end up using it all. I made an organza jacket with this top. So I bought about 5 yards in total and I ended up not using it all. So 2 yards will be more than enough for you. The length of the pieces I cut out is 8 inches and the width is about 45 inches. And I cut out about 8 pieces. You can make the width to be more than 45 inches depending on how full you want your ruffles to be. So you take this to the weaving machine and you weave the upper part, the down part, and both ends. You weave it at both ends. You should do a ready-made weaving for this if you want it to come out nice. I don't have the machine, so I had to take it to those that have industrial weaving machine and I did it there. So this is what I have after weaving this. You can see how nice it looks like. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to go and gather the pieces. I'm going to get the midpoints of each pieces and I'll run my gathers at the middle. So I'm going to be using my needle and thread for this. I'm just going to use my needle and thread to gather each pieces. So this is what I have after gathering them. So I'm just going to drag my thread together. I'm just going to drag them like so and gather it up. And I'll try to make my gathers to be even as much as I can. This is what it looks like after gathering. So I'm going to set this aside and I'll mark the points where I'm going to be placing the ruffles on my bustier. The first thing I did here was to come down by 1 inch from the upper part because of the allowance that I'm going to use to join to the lining. So I came down by 1 inch from the upper part and I connected the points like so. You'll be making the mark on the right side of your fabric, and my ruffles will be made on just the front side of the top. If you want, you can extend it to get to the back piece also, but for mine it's just going to be at the front of the top. Then I also came off by 1 inch from the hem of the top. I connected the dots. So I measured what I have there from the first line. I have about 9 inches. So I created about 1.5 inches spaces in between them. So I marked 1.5 inches like so. So I connected the points to the side seam like so. So I just followed the first shape and I connected all the lines like so. Now I'm going to bring in my ruffles and I'm going to place them on each lines. So I'll go ahead and stitch this to the first line. I'll make sure I stitch it at the middle. I'm going to stitch the organza at the middle where we run the gather stitch. So this is it after stitching the first layer. So I'm going to place the second ruffle on the second line. So I'm just going to pull the first one away like so. Then I'm going to place the second one on the second line that I made. So I'm going to place that on the second line. I'll just find a way to push away the first layer. Then I'm going to place this on the second layer and I'm going to stitch that down. I'm going to stitch it at the center line where I made my ruffles. I'll stitch that down and I'll repeat the same process to all the remaining pieces. This is what it looks like after I was done fixing my ruffles. You can see how beautiful it looks like. I ended up not adding the ruffles to the last line that I made because it was full already, so I did not bother to add the last ruffles. You can see it looks so nice, and this is what it looks like on the wrong side. The next step is to fix my zipper to the main fabric before turning this out with my lining. I'm going to be doing a seamless finishing for the top. So I'm going to fix my zipper to the main fabric first. I'm going to place the zipper at the back, making sure I leave ½ inch allowance at the hem. The ½ inch is the allowance to turn with my lining. So I'm going to use my pins to hold down my zipper to the 1 inch zipper allowance line, and I will stitch that down, making sure that I leave ½ inch allowance at the hem of the top before fixing the zipper. So this is what it looks like after fixing my zip to the main bodies. Next thing I'm going to do is to turn this with my lining. So I'm going to place my lining piece on the main fabric, right side facing each other. I'll make sure I match them up at the sides. I'm going to use my pin to hold that down at the side. I'll match the midpoint also. I'll match the dot line also. Make sure you tuck in your ruffles properly. So I'm just going to use my pins to hold the fabric to the lining so that everything can align. So I'll go ahead and stitch this with ½ inch allowance I'll stitch my fabric to the lining with 1/2 inch. So this is it after stitching. While stitching, I stitched along with my hemming gum so that when I turn to the right side and I iron, it can lay flat and nice. Then the next thing I'll do is to stitch the zipper allowance to the lining piece also. So I'm just going to follow the stitch line I have on the main fabric, and I'm going to stitch that down to the lining piece. Then I'm going to tuck in the ruffle very well, and I will stitch the hem of the top also. I'm going to stitch the hem with 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to cut off the excess on my zipper, the part that was not sewn to the fabric. I'm just going to cut that off. So this is it after stitching. I'm gonna have to stitch the zipper side and the hem of the top. Now I'll go ahead and turn my top to the right side. So to turn to the right side, I made an opening on the lining piece at the side seam of the lining piece. So I'm going to be turning my top through that opening. I just made an opening that my hand can pass through, and I'll be turning the top through the opening. So this is what it looks like after turning. You can see how neat it looks on both the wrong side and the right side. So I'm just going to make a stitch to close the opening. I'm just going to close that place, and that will be all. You can see how beautiful and neat it looks like on both the wrong side and the right side. So we have come to the end of today's tutorial, and this is what the top looks like on my clients. I hope this video was helpful to you. Please do not forget to give this a thumbs up, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.